you're also like, I mean, it was almost like the fertile ground when you came into Indian startup ecosystem, right? And at some point, I mean, after building these networks and, with your experience with your own startup, you also started doing some angel investing, right? So what is the first angel investment check that you've written, and what was your thinking at that point of time? Did you think like a traditional angel investor in US who's thinking it as a portfolio, or were you just, it's just like you met a great guy and you invested? So what was the process like? What was your thinking behind writing that first check?
Yeah. So, I would argue that when I landed in India, it wasn't fertile ground. It was more of a desert. There was nothing growing. It was just, arid land. But, that was changing. And I think, the real first tipping point was in 2010, when you saw a real first boom in the e-commerce space. Um, and I think that started changing people's mindsets. And when I say people, I mean really investors. There were no angel investors to really speak of in India at that time, except for a handful. And then on the founder side as well, it really got founders thinking about what was possible. So, coming back to the angel side, at that time we had Indian Angel Network, we had Mumbai Angels, but there weren't really many independent angels in India. So people were still operating as a group, and I think a lot of the angel networks were really thinking about investing in a very traditional sense at that time, 2010, 2012. My first angel check was in 2012 into a company. Was it 2012? I'm trying to think back. Yeah, I think it was 2012. So, timing's a little off because sometimes you agree to invest in a company and the investment doesn't close for months afterwards.
Yeah.
So there were two investments that happened virtually simultaneously. The first one was DataWeave. DataWeave was a company that I had spent a lot of time with and working with when I was at TLabs. And then there was another company called Gaze Metrics. Gaze Metrics was a company that actually came out of a startup weekend event that we had done. And I had gotten to know the founders quite well. I wound up investing in the company at 500 startups, as well as personally. And I invested first, and then 500 startups invested after I joined 500 as well. But I didn't really think about either of these companies in terms of a portfolio. I really thought about the founders and what did I like about the founders, what did I like about working with the founders, what did I see the potential for what they were trying to do, not from a economic perspective, but from really a product and technology perspective. Um, and I think the economics would come later if they were able to do what they wanted to do. So I don't really think about it as a professional angel investor. In a lot of ways, I still don't. My angel investing is still kind of it's a little bit more narrow than it used to be, but there are exceptions to the rules that happen all the time. And I think for me, one thing that stayed consistent over the last 8, 9, 10 years, it has been the fact that I'm more likely to write a check into a company where I connect with the founders on some level. Um, and sometimes I'm wrong. I wind up being wrong about that. But in most cases, I think if I establish a strong connection on a individual level, then the company still may not work out, but the relationship does work out. And I think that's one of the things from an angel investor perspective that I have learned since then is just thinking about longer term opportunities that come because you've built strong relationships.
Did you always engage with all the founders that you've invested with and sort of been their, go-to guy, or was it more of a passive investing?
So, it was, I think angel investing to a large degree has to be passive. You don't want to kind of stick your finger into the pie when it's not wanted, right? But you also want to be the, um, the cheerleader when it's needed, right? So the way my angel investing happened, uh, for many years I couldn't angel invest when I was at 500, but prior to that and post that, in most cases, the investments that I've done have been people that I have known, people that I have met, maybe not have had deep relationships with, but there've been people that I have met through, whether it was Startup Saturday, Startup Weekend, 500 startups, some of the advisory work that I had done over the last couple of years. So it, there have been some exceptions where I didn't know the founders before, um, but in those cases, I'm always clear to those founders that, look, if you want to check from me, I have to get to know you. It's not about the business only. It's about who you are and who I am. And there needs to be some sort of relationship that gets built before I'm going to write a check. Um, and yes, there are exceptions to that, of course. But generally speaking, I think, most of the companies that I've invested in will reach out to me when there is something that they need help with. Many of them I don't hear from for months or even years, but they know that if there is something that they need help with and they reach out to me, that I will do what I can to help them. So, which is nice, like, okay, you kind of stay in the background, you're there. It's almost like, having like kind of like a big brother or big sister relationship. Like, somebody's got your back and you can reach out to them when you need that help. But, they're not going to interfere otherwise. So that's generally the approach that I take.
You've touched upon working at TLabs, right? I mean, that's the incubator by Times Internet, which is sort of iconic in its own way. What was the experience like working with them, and what was the model that you guys took in terms of like incubating startups?
Yeah, so T Labs was the typical accelerator model. It was very similar in the Techstars and 500 startups model of having an on-site incubator, where a physical incubator where these startups would come and work out of. Abhishek, my partner at T Labs, and I both felt that having that in-person incubator was important. Serendipity happens when people are around each other. And so it was kind of designed as a cohort based accelerator right from the beginning. The plan was to do about 8 to 10 startups per cohort, run 2 cohorts per year, primarily consumer focused, because, that's kind of what Times Internet understood and did. But there wasn't necessarily any limitations saying that, it has to be something that would be strategic for Times Internet. Um, the idea was really to just find great founders with big ideas on the consumer side and write a check and try to help them, both from an individual perspective as well as from a corporate perspective, right? So we wrote at that time when we started, we were writing 10 lakh checks for 10%. Yeah, so it was basically a 1 crore post money valuation. Um, and there were price rounds that were happening at that time. So this was 2012, late 2011, early 2012, and that was kind of the norm. I think Times quickly saw that the market was adapting and started changing the model for T Labs as the market was also changing. A lot of accelerators started popping up in 2012, 2013. Most of them are no longer operating. I think Microsoft is one of the few that's still operating an accelerator in India. Uh, TLabs has also moved from having a physical incubator to having a virtual accelerator program, and even now that's kind of not. I'm not sure exactly what T Labs is. I think they've kind of morphed T Labs into T Ventures, so it's kind of multi-stage investing that they're doing now. So yeah, there are not many accelerators left in India that I can think of. I think there was one out of Bombay that just got started last year or something. I'm drawing a blank on the name.
I mean,
Venture Catalyst, I think it
yeah,
was.
I mean, there are a lot of I mean, the Surge head from Sequoia, the sort of combination of virtual plus, I mean, with pandemic, everything moved on to virtual, right?
Yeah, Surge, is an interesting one because it's not your typical early stage accelerator that has been the traditional model over the last 7, 8 years. Surge, you see companies that are coming in at the idea stage, but you also see companies that have been around and raised multiple rounds. They've been operating for 4, 5, 6 years before they go through the Surge program. So I think Surge has been really interesting in the fact that they can be almost multi-stage in their approach. They are working with companies across multiple regions. Like you said, the hybrid physical and virtual. Now, of course, it's all virtual, but really kind of, I think Surge really changed the game in terms of what people's expectations from an accelerator are. Of course, it doesn't hurt that Sequoia is writing very large checks. I think it's $1.5 million that they're writing per company. The valuations are variable, so they will theoretically they could take a company that's been around for 4 or 5 years, already has a $20 million valuation in India, and still invest, and also take a company that is at an idea stage and maybe invest at a $5 million valuation, right? So I think that's really interesting how they've done that, and they've done it incredibly well over the last year and a half, 2 years.
Yes, I mean, there's some incredible companies coming out of Surge. I
Yeah.
mean, and pretty much every VC firm is sort of trying in terms of, I mean, linking it back to the community building, right? Like, I think both Sequoia, Lightspeed, and others are trying to sort of build this network of companies and do more to attract startups. I want to like a little bit unpack how you guys worked at TLabs. So,
Mhm.
in what exact role did you work there, and like what was the approach in terms of did you actually select the startups, or you had like different applications from the startups and you picked who will actually work in the physical space? What was the exact model there?
Yeah. So, like I said, it was a very traditional accelerator model. I was asked to come on board basically to help with deal flow. Having launched Startup Saturday and Startup Weekend, I had a fairly strong network amongst founders across Delhi and increasingly across the country. So I was asked to really focus on sourcing companies. So, for batch one and batch two, there wasn't, yeah, we had an application process. Companies would come in and put in their applications, but a lot of it was really about Abhishek and I being on the ground, traveling, meeting companies, talking to them, and in many cases asking them to put in an application as a formality. But it was really driven by our existing networks. So, you founders that we knew might introduce us to other founders that they knew that were starting companies, et cetera, et cetera. So there was that sourcing side. Once applications came in, we would run through the applications and kind of weed them out. And the companies that we liked, then we would start spending a little bit more time with them, interviewing them, diving into specifics of their business and kind of where they were and what they were doing, et cetera, et cetera. And the companies that we liked, we would make them an offer. In some cases, companies would try to negotiate that offer. In other cases, companies would turn down that offer. and in other cases, companies would fortunately accept the offer. So once the offer was accepted, we had an official start time for the program, and like a Techstars or 500 startups, the companies were expected to move, if they were from outside Delhi, move to the NCR region and physically set up their offices in our offices in Noida. And, we would all be working in the same space on a daily basis. We would invite on a weekly basis, we would invite different parts of the ecosystem, sometimes other founders. In other cases, we had investors, angel investors, and VCs who would come. And the idea was to give a talk on a topic, and then also to just spend some time with the companies and build relationships. Um, so that's pretty much how it ran, like a traditional accelerator program. And then once it was a 4-month program. Once the program was over, there would be a demo day, right? Just like
Yeah.
every other accelerator program.
Mhm. So at some point, you also started working with founded startups for their India strategy, right?
Hmm.
How did that come about?
So I actually met 500 startups when I was running Startup Weekend in India. Um, I saw that they were doing Geeks on a Plane. This was in 2011. So 500 startups hadn't reached the level of notoriety that it did soon afterwards. Um, in Indian places like India, it was relatively unknown. So it was interesting, kind of explaining to founders in India why it was cool that 500 startups was going to be at Startup Weekend. Um, but so I reached out to 500 startups when I saw that they were doing Geeks on a Plane to India for the first time, and just said, hey, if you guys are going to be in India, love to do a Startup Weekend around it. Love to have you at Startup Weekend. And had a couple of conversations with Kristen, and she ran all of the events and the Geeks on the Plane and all of that when at 500. So, we talked through some of the plans, and she's like, "Yeah, this sounds great. We've done Startup Weekend in a lot of other places, so this sounds really interesting. It'll give us a good kind of intro into the Indian market." So, it was funny. They landed. I think it was a Thursday night, and Friday night they were at Startup Weekend Delhi, and they were there pretty much, I think, if I remember correctly, all 3 days: Friday, Saturday, and Sunday. That's how I met Dave and Paul and Kristen and Christine and everyone else. And spent a little bit of time on the sides, just introducing them to other folks in India, across different cities, people that they may want to meet, founders, mostly founders, very few investors, but mostly founders at that time. And, when I was at TLabs, we were in regular touch. I was sharing deal flow with them on a regular basis. Paul was making more regular trips to India to see and scout companies in India. So I was helping him with meeting companies and founders that I had met or known, or even had invested in across India. And, the relationship just kind of grew from there. And then they asked me to come on board and, run all of the India investments in October 2012 is when I joined them.